everybody, we're back in the High Gatsby studio, and as you know, High Gatsby stands for Have I Got a Story for You? Oh boy, today, have I got a story for you. First, I want you to look at this photograph. It's of a house called the Blue House, La Casa Azul. It's located in Coyoacan, Mexico, and it's the home of this cute little girl by the name of Frida Kahlo. Frida was the third of 4 girls born to Mr. and Mrs. Kahlo, and those girls loved playing at the Blue House. You'll see Frida here on the right side of this photograph. Something kind of sad happened to Frida when she was 6 years old. She caught a virus called polio. Now, this was back about 1913, 1914. So it was a long time ago, and they didn't have medicine for this virus called polio. And it had a lot of impact on a lot of children all around the world. For Frida, it showed up in one of her legs. Her leg got very, very weak. The muscles just became like rubber bands, and it began to not grow and develop very well. She had to stay in bed for 9 months in order for her to get over this virus. And when she healed from the virus, her leg was still somewhat weak. And so she had a limp that she had for the rest of her life. Now, Frida spent a lot of time with her father. She adored him and he adored her. He was a professional photographer. So Frida would often be found in his studio helping him out. And in the studio, she gained a real keen eye for detail in working with her father. Her father was very encouraging. He encouraged her, even despite her disability, to run and play soccer and be a photographer and be an artist and maybe even take up wrestling. Wrestling for a girl in the early 1900s was unknown, but he told Frida she could do anything she wanted to do. Well, Frida knew exactly what she wanted to do. She wanted to be a doctor. So in her teenage years, she went to the National Preparatory School and she began to study medicine. She did really well there. She was very well liked. She had a lot of friends. She was smart. She was witty. She was funny. And she got into some trouble sometimes. She was very daring and pretty much had a mind of her own. One day, she was walking through one of the auditoriums at the school, and she saw this artist up on some scaffolding. That's like a platform that's raised up real high, and he was painting a mural. A mural is a gigantic painting painted on a wall or the ceiling. The artist's name was Diego Rivera, and she watched him for hours. She was mesmerized by his art. She especially liked the way that his paintings told stories about miners and farmers, industrial laborers, and often peasants. And she liked the very simple lines and the rich colors and the large figures that he put on his murals. Well, one day, she and one of her friends were going home from school, and they had jumped on the bus to head home. As they were going home, there was a trolley car that was somewhat stopped in an intersection, and the bus driver got very frustrated. He began to honk his horn and kind of yell at the trolley car to get moving, that he had a place to go. He needed to get these people home. He lost his patience and he went around the trolley car, and as he passed in front of it, the trolley car sped up and it crashed into the bus, crushing it up against a building. It was a horrible accident. I mean, really horrible. Like instantly, a lot of people died. And Frida got terribly hurt. She was actually crushed. When they were able to get her out of the bus, they found out that she had a crushed foot. She had a couple broken ribs. She had a broken collarbone. Her leg was broken in 11 different places, and even her shoulder was dislocated. But that wasn't the worst of her injuries. There was a railing that people on the bus would hold on to as the bus was going down the street. That railing in the crash had come loose, and it actually pierced her. It went through her body, through her back, and out her pelvis. They rushed her to the hospital, and the doctors weren't even sure if she would make it. But she lived. But can you imagine the kind of pain that she was in? She stayed in the hospital for 1 month while they tried to get her stable, while they did quite a few operations. And finally they told her that it would be okay for her parents to take her home. They took her home in an ambulance. They got her on a stretcher and took her into her home. And she laid in bed for months and months trying to recover. At one point, they even put a plaster cast from her armpit area, shoulders, all the way down to her legs in order to stabilize all of the injuries inside her. Besides being in excruciating pain, she was terribly bored. All she could do all day long was just lie in bed. So her father came up with an idea. He went and bought her an easel and some paints and brushes. And he came into her and he said, Frida, I know you're bored. I know this is terrible, but I want you to be able to go back to something you enjoyed as a little girl. You enjoyed painting. So why don't you try to paint? Papa, how can I paint? I can't even sit up. He said, I know. I will make this easel fit your bed. And so he cut the easel down and he propped it on the bed, and she was able to lie in her bed and paint. It was a wonderful time in the midst of a horrible time for Frida. It was a way for her to express how she was feeling, yet she was still lonely. So she asked her father if he would put a mirror above her bed. In this photograph, can you see the mirror that's attached right above her bed? Frida painted and painted and painted. In time, with a lot of therapy, a lot of hard work, and probably mostly determination, Frida was able to sit up. She was able to be in a wheelchair. And eventually she was able to stand up and take a few very faltering steps. But she was on her way to recovery. What she learned, though, during that time was she probably wasn't going to be able to be a doctor because she couldn't even stand up for very long. But she loved being an artist. So even as she healed, she continued to paint and paint and paint. She painted her friend, Elena, and she painted a portrait of her sister, Christina. She also painted pictures of herself because she looked at herself all day long in that mirror. And here's another one called Time Flies. What in this painting shows time and flying? I think it's rather ironic that she painted a painting called Time Flies because from what she has said, time crept for her. She painted all day long, pouring her heart and soul, her happiness, and even her pain into the paintings that she did. A few years passed, and she heard that that artist, remember the one I was talking about earlier, the guy named Diego Rivera? She heard that he was going to be back in town. And she thought, I'm going to show him some of my paintings and see what he says. She gathered her paintings and her cane. She went and probably hesitantly got onto a bus to get to the area that he was painting his mural. She got off the bus and approached Mr. Rivera. To me, doing just those few things showed a lot of bravery. She asked him to look at her paintings to see if they looked good, if she had any talent, if he thought she could make a living with her paintings. She knew that she was no longer going to be able to be a doctor, and so she had to make a living somehow. He took a look at her paintings, and you know what? He loved them. He said that she showed great talent, that she was actually a better artist than he was. At first, she didn't believe him. But as she and Diego spent more time together, she realized that he really did admire her artwork. They spent so much time together talking about art that they kind of started liking each other. And then they fell in love with each other. And then they decided to get married. Well, I have to tell you, her mother was not at all happy about this marriage. Even though Diego was older than Frida and wasn't what her mother thought was handsome, Frida thought he was very handsome, and she loved him very, very much. Here is a painting she did after they were married. Diego loved painting pictures of the Mexican peasants and working class, and he instilled a passion of Mexican history and folklore into Frida. She began to wear traditional Mexican clothing and style her hair in a traditional way. Frida traveled all around Mexico and the United States with Diego as he painted his murals and met important people. It was difficult on her body. She was in constant pain, but she wanted to be with her husband. All the while, she continued to paint. It was a source of comfort for her. She could express how she was feeling through her artwork. She continued to wear the clothing and style of the Mexican people, and wherever they went, people thought she looked eccentric, exotic. She braided her long hair and wrapped it behind her head. She would put flowers in her hair. She'd wear Mexican jewelry. Then, of course, she would have to paint a portrait of herself. Diego Rivera loved the way that Frida looked. He loved the clothes that she wore. He loved how she styled her hair. He loved the flowers in her hair. And he even loved her eyebrows. I don't know if you've noticed this, but Frida has some very interesting eyebrows. They're thick and they kind of grow across the bridge of her nose. She even has a little bit growing on the corners of her mouth. Some people would not care for that, but Frida and Diego thought it was very striking. Hey, I wonder if I could look like Frida Kahlo. I bet I could. Of course, I would need to get some flowers for my hair, and I would probably need to get some Mexican jewelry, and I would have to change my clothes, and I know I'm going to have to darken my eyebrows, but hey, what do you think? Problem is, I really don't know what I look like because I don't have my glasses on. Give me a minute. Ooh, yes, I guess I do look a little bit like her. Frida and Diego began to travel all around Mexico and the U.S. together. And Diego encouraged her to have her own art show in New York City. He told her that he knew a lot of people they could invite, and people had seen some of her artwork because of Diego Rivera. So there was an exhibit in New York. Lots of people came. She showed 40 to 50 different paintings at the exhibit, and about half of them sold. It was a success. One friend that she met while there called her a surrealist. It sounds a little bit like I'm saying a so-realist, like something would look so real. But the word surreal means kind of the opposite. It's like something that you would see in a dream or possibly a nightmare. And some of her paintings were really surreal. Here's just a few that she sold during that New York exhibit. She went on to have an exhibit in Paris, but she didn't have nearly the audience nor the outcome that she wanted. She only sold one painting, a painting called The Frame. But do you know who bought it? The Louvre. If you don't know, the Louvre is one of the most famous international art museums in the world. If you're going to sell a painting, the Louvre is the one you want to sell it to. As time went by, Frida found out something kind of bad about her husband. He had a girlfriend. Yeah, you know, when you're married, you're not supposed to have another boyfriend or a girlfriend. but Diego did, and it broke Frida's heart. It devastated her, and when she's in pain, whether it be physical or emotional, she has to paint about it. And some of her most favorite paintings came out of this time of deep sorrow. Paintings like this one. It's called The Two Fridas. The Frida on the right is dressed in that traditional Mexican clothing. In her hand, she holds a little picture of Diego. But what is kind of odd about this painting is the fact that you can see her heart. Her heart looks whole, and it's pumping life throughout her body. But then she is holding hands with herself, the second Frida. This Frida is dressed in the traditional clothes of Europe. That was some of her ancestry and Diego's ancestry. But look at her heart. It is broken. It is open. It is somewhat raw. And you can see the vein that comes down out of the heart into her lap, where in her other hand she holds a pair of scissors. Her heart has been broken, and it's bleeding out on the front of her dress. Here's another one that she painted. It's called Necklace of Thorns and Hummingbird. If you look at her face, what type of emotion do you see? It's not happy. It's not angry. I call it solemn, a little bit sad, kind of withdrawn, thinking. On her, she has a necklace of thorns that are beginning to penetrate or cut her skin, and she's starting to bleed. There's a monkey on her shoulder. It's actually drawn after a monkey that Diego gave her as a gift. And the monkey is playing with the necklace, but he's not thinking about the pain that he's causing Frida as she wears the necklace. She did that to represent Diego. He plays around, but he doesn't realize how much pain he's causing her. There's a black cat with piercing eyes standing on her other shoulder, looking out menacingly. And then around her neck, there is a hummingbird. In Mexican folklore, the hummingbird was a symbol or an icon of good luck. But this hummingbird is black and dead. This definitely gives you a feeling of what Frida's heart was going through. Frida was so upset with Diego that she took matters into her own hand. One day she grabbed her scissors, and the beautiful hair that he loved, she began to cut away. And because she did self-portraits, she had to paint a picture of it. Look at her sitting in the chair. What's she holding in her hand? Scissors. And what is scattered all over the floor and all over the chair? Her hair. Is she wearing the clothes that Diego loves her to wear? No, she is not. Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo separated. They then divorced. They did realize that they had a hard time living without each other, and so they got back together again. They even got remarried again, but after that, they separated, got back together, separated. They had a hard time being faithful to each other, and yet, I think down deep, they truly loved each other. Frida was becoming quite well known on her own, but her pain was deep. I don't know what caused her more pain. I don't know if it was more painful to have a broken heart and the emotions that go along with a love that is not faithful or loyal, or if it's more painful to have a broken body, one that hurts all the time. In her lifetime, she had more than 30 surgeries. She had infections that kept coming back. She had an infection on her foot that made them have to remove a few toes and wound up having to remove her whole leg. She wanted to have children, but because of the injuries that she suffered as a young woman, she could not have children. The few times that she did get pregnant, she miscarried, or the babies died when they were still inside of her. And that's terribly painful. As Frida aged, she was in more and more pain. She knew that she probably didn't have long to live, and one thing that she wanted more than anything was for the country of Mexico to have an exhibit of her artwork. She had been so proud to be Mexican. She had fought for the underdog in Mexican society. Countries around the world had recognized her, but Mexico had not. It wasn't until 1953 she was asked to have an exhibit in Mexico. She was very excited, but she was very ill. She was in bed most of the time. Her doctor came to visit her, and she said, "Guess what? I'm going to get to have an exhibit of my artwork here in my own beloved country." The doctor was very happy for her, but he said, "You can't go. You have got to stay in bed. There is no way you can go to that exhibit." Well, I've learned through my research that you don't tell Frida Kahlo no. Her dad told her as a young girl that she could do anything she wanted. And so she went to the exhibit. She didn't necessarily disobey the doctor's orders. She hired some men to come and lift her bed up, with her still in it, put it on the back of a truck, and take it to the exhibit. She had a wonderful time at the exhibit. She laid in her bed and greeted and talked to all the visitors that came to look at her paintings. Frida died a year later, in 1954, at the age of 47. It was decades later, in the 1970s, in the 80s, in the 90s, that there began to be a revival of Frida Kahlo's artwork. People began to read her story and saw how she was a minority. She was a woman. She was Hispanic. She lived in a very difficult time under very difficult circumstances. Her health was horrible, and they looked at her as an icon, as an inspiration, as a hero for minorities. She didn't care what people thought. She painted what she wanted to paint. She painted her expression of what was going on inside of her, which caused people all over the world to embrace her. So now when you go to the store and you see a picture of a lady with a unibrow and a mustache at the corners of her mouth, wearing a great big flower decoration on her head, you're going to know who that is. You're going to know her story. You're going to know her passion. You're going to know her talent. She is Frida Kahlo, a pioneer for the minority. Now remember, you need to keep checking back in with YouTube, because later on in the week, we are going to have some fun activities that revolve around Frida Kahlo. Thanks for joining me, and remember, stay safe and stay healthy.